Hello, Laverne here, and thank you for joining me. May this video be a blessing to you, and may it honor and glorify God and His kingdom. I have quite a bit of information to cover in this video, so I'm going to be speaking fairly quickly. I'm going to try and show how it is that science and Christianity are not in conflict with one another. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is the fact that there's been some new discoveries in regards to evolution. In December, there were a couple of news stories that are simply going to show to disprove some things about evolution that was considered to be fact. It's been a long-standing belief that that man and Neanderthal had an ancestor in common, and that it was really from these two species, one died out while the other continued on, and that they lived at one time with one another, but that there really was only these two different species. Well, new evidence found in Russia just completely destroys this theory. They've come across a new, I guess, man. I'm not sure if you actually want to call him a man, but it's showing that there were a number of different species of man, if you will, who were living around the same time. And this completely destroys what was once considered to be absolute fact. Now, this does not do anything to destroy evolution itself. And I want to make it clear here that I am a supporter. I believe in evolution and an aged universe and earth. But I've always held the contention, the belief that there are many things within the theory or the belief of evolution, the science of evolution, that are not fact. And this is one very good example that's showing that there are so many things about evolution that for a long time people have been declaring to be fact, that there's no disputing it, and yet now we see something different. The same holds true for a discovery in Israel, again in December. And I'm going to include links to both of these news stories. And what we're finding now is that man is older than what was once thought. According to traditional thinking, man was first actually born, or that the earliest man that we know of was from Africa. The theory has been that from Africa, man then moved to the different continents and so on. But now, in Israel, they found a tooth that they believe to be 400,000 years old, which is double the age of what was once considered to be the earliest man. And so it's showing that it's not out of Africa, but that there was man in Israel where we are, this is the area, supposedly, according to Scripture, where God actually revealed Himself. This is where, the nation of Israel began. God, through Moses, taking the nation of Israel out of Egypt and so on. It's where Abraham was given the first covenant, and so on and so forth. So the findings within the earth itself that are bringing forth this information is actually showing that Scripture is being proven through archaeology. Which brings me to my third point of new information. And this isn't so much new information, but is kind of confirmed. In December's issue of National Geographic has a story of archaeology that's going on in Israel. And it talks about new information that they're finding that supports Scripture, that is showing evidence of King David and King Solomon, finding the mines of Solomon and so on. And so science, by way of archaeology, is showing Scripture to be true. And I just ask that you will look at the number of the different links I'm going to provide in the information part. I have created a playlist that is going to be dealing strictly with new evidence that supports Scripture and science, that the two are not in conflict with one another. The one link talks about a great wall that's been found in Jerusalem. Now this was actually a couple years ago, but the wall is so huge that it's simply, well, it's very difficult to imagine how they could have done it without the kind of machinery that we have today. But if you consider the fact the scripture tells us there used to be giants living back then it, it falls into place that this could very well explain why these walls were able to be built the way that they were. Now, there are going to be atheists who are going to say, well, if there really were giants living at that time, we would have found evidence of it. But keep in mind that these were an evil race of giants, and they sacrificed their own babies to their god in fire. So fire was it was important to them. Now, if they sacrificed their own babies in fire, I think it's a reasonable conclusion to assume that they used a form of cremation when it came to taking care of their dead rather than burial. And so if this is the case, that they cremated their dead rather than burying them, and when you look at things such as the Israelites, they had very strict rules when it came to touching the dead, it makes sense then that it would be near impossible to find an actual skeleton or a fossil of one of these giants. But if we look at the things that we're finding, such as these huge walls, certainly a reasonable theory is that these great walls were created by a race of giants. So I encourage you to look at the different sites, and you'll see, especially as a Christian, that Scripture is actually being proved by new information coming from different archaeological sites. Now I would like to talk about something that atheists love to bring up when it comes to the story of creation, and that is the fact that the earth and the moon, according to Scripture, was not placed until the fourth day. How then could life have begun, and how then can we account for the fact that the sun is older than the earth, according to science today? Well, this actually does line up. The two, I should say, actually do line up for this account. Scientists know today that life actually began on Earth before it possibly could have, given the condition of the sun 3 billion years ago. For 3 billion years ago, the sun was not nearly as bright and hot as what it is today. Scientists know this, and they are confounded by the fact that they know life began before the sun was hot enough and bright enough to provide what life would have needed to survive. In fact, the Earth should have been completely encased in ice when life was beginning. But this is not the case. Scientists know this. So scientists are confounded by the fact that the sun was not giving off enough heat and light to produce life, and yet it was produced. And this lines up with Scripture. Scripture tells us that we had life before the sun and the moon were in place as they are today. So they are not in conflict, but they actually line up. And when we read the full explanation of creation in Scripture, and by this I'm referring to the writings of Enoch, in particular the second book. I've explained this before, that Genesis gives us a Reader's Digest version of creation. In Enoch we see the full story. And I'm going to read from the beginning of the story of creation, found in 2nd Enoch, beginning with chapter 25. I commanded, meaning God here, I commanded in the very lowest parts that visible things should come down from invisible, and a doyle came down very great, and I beheld him, and lo, he had a belly of great light. Now a doyle, the name of doyle means light of creation. And I said to him, Become undone, a doyle, and let the visible come out of you. And he came undone, and a great light came out, and I was in the midst of the great light. And as there is born light from light, there came forth a great age, and showed all creation, which I had thought to create. I want to go back here for Christians. It says, and I was in the midst of the great light. This is describing Christ, who is the foundation of all creation. All things were created through him and for him. Scripture tells us this, and here we have a description of the Godhead calling down a Doyle, who is the light of creation. He opens up his belly. There is this great explosion which lines up with science talking about the Big Bang. So what we see is this explosion of light, and then God tells us that he was in this light of creation. This also lines up with Scripture, for Jesus himself tells us that he is in the Father and the Father is in him. And this lines up perfectly with the story of creation found in the writings of Enoch. Now Enoch goes on to explain that this happened a second time, that God called someone down from the invisible and went through a second stage of creation. And all of these things, we are told, happened before the morning of the first day. So there are these two great ages, and then began the story of the 6 days of creation. So we had these two great ages, and then the beginning of the first morning of creation. This also lines up with what we know about science. This describes a time when there were things happening that the earth and the moon had not yet been set on the earth. And when we consider the fact that in the beginning of creation, from the Big Bang, that the universe was much smaller. The universe is expanding, but 3 billion years ago the universe would have been much smaller. And therefore the energy in it, closer and tighter, that there would have been more energy from the point of creation. Therefore, it's reasonable to assume that light was actually traveling faster than what it is today. I know this is something that a lot of people are going to argue with, but think about this, even from a science point of view. As we were closer to the point of creation, and the universe was more compact, the energy more compact, it makes sense that the light could have been traveling faster than what we know it being done today. I'm not talking about the light from the sun, I'm talking about light from the point of creation, where it all began. There are things called hypernovas and supernovas. I encourage people to look into them. And what you'll find is that the hypernova is the most destructive force in the whole universe. If we were too close to a hypernova, when that sun collapsed and exploded, it would have destroyed the earth. However, if there was light coming from the supernova and we were at the right distance, rather than destroying the earth, it could have been the light added to the light of the sun that would have been enough to create life. And if not from a hypernova or a supernova, then from some other source that came from the point of the beginning of creation. Some other light in addition to the sun, giving us enough light and heat for life to begin. This lines up with Scripture, and it lines up with science, because the sun itself was not giving off enough heat and light to create life on earth when it first did. Alright, I hope you will join me in the next video. There's just so much to cover to explain how Scripture and science are not in conflict. Till next time, peace and blessings.